Incoming transmission.
The heavens have become a part of man's world.
Incoming transmission. Incoming transmission.
Tranquility Base, this is Houston. Can we get both of you on the camera for a minute, please?
Call me Captain.
I think we're going to have
Mission log.
Devyn's mission log. Welcome back, everybody, to I believe it's the third installment of Devyn's mission log. And just like always, we're completely switching it up this time. So I know the first one was all anime weeb stuff, and then the second one was like the high thoughts. This one, I'm actually going to be doing like a topic focused episode. I kind of got inspired by listening to Eddie's episodes, and I liked how they were all topic based. And I said, I believe in the last mission log, that I wanted to do more topic based ones. So here we go. This is going to be the first one. To kind of kick it into that horror feeling, I decided to do one about the ocean and everything surrounding just the creepy side of it, you know? Because I don't know about you guys, but me personally, I have a deep, terrible fear of the ocean, okay? Not to the extent that I can't go to the beach and enjoy myself, but if you drop me in the middle of the ocean, I'm going to freak out. I mean, obviously everyone's going to freak out in that kind of predicament, but something about the middle of the ocean just scares me. Large bodies of water, especially. Like, this is going to sound stupid, but I can't swim very well. So pools will sometimes scare me. I've almost drowned in like 2 different pools. And I have that fear. It's called thalassophobia, if you didn't know. And it's a fear of large bodies of water, or a fear of the ocean. And researching this episode nearly killed me, because there were several different points where I was like engaging with videos and documents that depicted the deep ocean, and it just, I found this one video. I think it's literally titled Thalassophobia, right? And it's this animation that is designed to scare people with my people who are afraid of the ocean. It would be like if somebody who's afraid of spiders watched a video of 1,000 spiders crawling out of a nest, right? And it almost killed me, because it's just showing like this first person perspective of being in the middle of a violent ocean, and it's like rocking back and forth, and it's super dark outside. It's like all cloudy above him. It's all gray, and then he looks down, and then he just sees nothing but darkness. And it's only 40-second song, and I had to turn it off. I was just like, fuck this. I'm out. I'm not doing this no more. So, out of the desire to overcome my fear slowly but surely, and just because the topic interests me so much, I decided to base this whole episode around thalassophobia and scary things revolving the ocean. And I should warn you now, it's all over the place, okay? I originally wanted to do more topic based with like facts going into every specific incident, the people involved, etc., etc. And I do that here to some extent. But I didn't want to make a 4-hour episode about scary things about the ocean, because one, nobody's going to listen to that. At least nobody's going to sit down and listen to it consciously the first time around, right? It's going to have to be spread over multiple weeks. Nobody is realistically going to finish it. 2, I don't want to listen to that. I don't want to edit that. I don't want to record that. So I decided to just do this episode, a mini episode, and depending on how well this one is received, I might do a part 2 of this, because eventually, later on down the line, going into summer, I'm going to continue to do mission logs about creepy things, especially for summer and then for fall. But this is like my first introduction into that, so you guys can get a taste. Now, I should warn you, we are going to be touching on some scary topics, but nothing too overly scary. If I can handle it, and I'm scared of the ocean, you guys can handle it. I had to research this, and I'm telling you guys this, and if I'm able to handle it, I don't want to hear no complaints, okay? That's all I'm saying. But, it's going to be a light episode. It's going to be chill. And we're just going to talk about some creepy stuff. It should be interesting, so I hope you all enjoy it. Moving forward, I figured I would start off with something that almost all of you could probably recognize. And that's Davey Jones, right? Because I think something like Davey Jones is what initially draws everybody to the ocean. At least to being curious about the ocean, right? Because it's one of those folk tales or folklore that really spread its name throughout the human consciousness to the point where I think most cultures around the world are familiar with the tale, at least to some extent. And I just thought it was extremely interesting because doing research into it, we actually don't know where the tale of Davey Jones even arrived from. We don't know where it originated from. Davey Jones is supposed to be representative of the bottom of the ocean or dying in the ocean or something like that, right? And sailors believed that it was a giant ghost-like ship that would come out of the water and sink other ships. Or it was a ship that would appear out of a fog and sink other ships, and it would be captained by Davey Jones and the crew of the damned, all that stuff, right? But nobody knows where it started. They can't even roughly pinpoint it. Although some historians or maybe scientists did locate this pub owner way back in the day. I can't find any years on this, so bear with me. Some of these don't have years, some of them do have years. But this pub owner, way back in the day, went by the name of David Jones, or maybe David Jones. They can't verify. And he was a pub owner in London. He became notorious because apparently what he would do is he would lure sailormen into his bar. He would get them drunk, and then he would trap them inside of a locker and sell them into slavery, which is very synonymous with the Davey Jones legend because you're supposed to be resting in Davey Jones's locker when you go to the bottom of the ocean. So if you didn't know that, now you know. But more than just that, he would later go on to steal a pirate ship and then become a pirate himself, who would raid other pirate ships and often killed all the members on board by decapitating them. That was one of his favorite go-tos. He would decapitate all of his enemies, which is unnecessarily brutal. I think we could agree. On top of that, one thing that he really liked to do was hold the other pirates prisoner on their own ship and sink them while they were stuck on the ship. And it's just one of those superstitions that really interests me for some reason. Like, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but there was a very common superstition back in the day. I don't think it's so much relevant now in our modern age of science and technology, but one superstition that was very prevalent back in the day was the superstition that sailors' spirits, once they passed on, would transfer into the seagulls that, populate the ocean. And it's bad luck to kill a seagull because you're bringing death upon yourself by doing that. And apparently there was even a witch associated with these seagulls that was the wife of Davey Jones or something to that extent. I'm not entirely sure because she didn't really interest me too much. But, again, depending on how this episode goes, I might make a part 2 and talk about her in that one. But apparently, yeah, she was married to Davey Jones and her ties to the seagulls are pretty strong. But personally, I think the whole seagull thing is a bunch of bullshit, okay? I saw it in The Lighthouse. I think it was Willem Dafoe's character. He was talking about how killing the seagulls is bad luck and you'll die and that kind of stuff. And to some extent, it kind of makes sense. But personally, I just don't want to get into the mindset that all these people died and then became a bunch of birds, It feels weird to me. That superstition isn't really as interesting as something like Davey Jones or even the Cloboterman. I believe that's how you say it, the Cloboterman. For those of you that don't know, the Cloboterman are little water sprites that were very popular in European folklore. Apparently, these sprites or spirits would appear on ships in order to sing, repair, or help the crews in need. Oftentimes, they could be spotted working underneath the ship or inside the ship whenever it needed repairs. And they were supposed to be like a good entity, right? They're supposed to be a good spirit. And when you saw them, it was supposed to bring feelings of like comfort. But personally, the Clobotoman myth as a whole scares the shit out of me because one, they're described as dwarf-like creatures that look human and are dressed in all yellow, right? In my head, you're going to be seeing these people most likely, or these things, most likely in the dead of the night by yourself while exploring the ship. You're either going to see them inside the ship or on the ship at some point. So imagine you're on a ship, like a pirate ship. You go down to the hall to grab some coffee or to grab some like grain or something. And then you see this little dwarf in all yellow that kind of looks human but doesn't look human working on the ship. And it's supposed to be representative of something positive. Like, it just kind of freaks me out. They can often be distinguished by their yellow clothes, but they also are commonly seen holding a pipe and carrying a hammer because, again, they're supposed to be fixing the ships. It just freaks me out, though. Everything about these little fuckers freaks me out. And I hope to God they don't actually exist because it's something like the gnomes, right? The gnomes of Mexico that me and Eddie talked about previously. Or even like the pixies that we've mentioned in one episode or another. It to me, it seems like it's a spirit or an entity that wants to make itself friendly to people so that they don't realize the true intentions of the thing, right? I don't know. It just freaks me out. I would not want to see a little dwarf monster working on my ship at 2 a.m. I would just be in a panic for the rest of the night. But that's the thing about the ocean. It's like, how can we truly know unless we're out there? It's not something that I would say is readily available to most people because, yeah, you can go to the beach and you can go on a cruise or something like that. But most people will never experience the true ocean. They'll never get to go to where there's no islands in sight. They're in the middle of the like Atlantic Ocean, out there surviving the waves and the weather. Most people never have to experience that kind of ocean. And I would say that's the ocean that we should be the most afraid of, especially considering that we've only explored like 80% of it, right? I know we throw a number like that out there on the show before because this is a topic that we've touched on before, but I felt like I needed to address it more. And so I started looking up the facts. And it turns out, yeah, we've only explored 20% of our entire ocean. There's still 80% that we have no idea. There's still 80% that we have no clue about. We don't know what lives there. We don't know what could live there. We don't know how it looks. It's just unexplorable to some degree, at least with the technology that we have right now. So keeping that in mind, there's so much about the ocean that could end up being true, you know? Like the Bible talks about like the Leviathan, the creature that God created that no man could kill. And although there haven't been any sightings, at least concrete sightings of the Leviathan or creatures like it, there have been hundreds, if not thousands, of sightings of creatures that could be something like the Leviathan, right? In 1960, there was these 2 soldiers that went out on an expedition to explore the Mariana Trench. They wanted to see what was down there, and they gathered a small crew and decided to set out on their own. A group of scientists that were informed of the expedition told them that it's pretty much useless because nothing could survive at 36,000 feet because of all the pressure down there. But the 2 men were like, we're going to do it anyways, and they gathered their crew and they went out to the Mariana Trench and they started going down. 5 hours into the expedition, they started to hear all these strange sounds and they started to get freaked out. They contacted the crew up above and they told them like, look, we're seeing some strange things. We don't know what's going on. And the crew was like, you need to calm down. You're just weary. You're tired. You're hallucinating. And, you know, the guys didn't believe it. They knew something was up. They could hear something, right? Almost like something was brushing up against their ship or something was touching the ship. And it concerned them, obviously, because they're diving down 36,000 feet. Like, you don't want to have a crack in the hull down there. That's like one of the worst ways to die. So they continue to keep an eye out. At one point, they even pulled up some sort of monitor or radar. I can't get all the information on this story. It's kind of vague. But they pulled up a monitor or a radar and they started to look out at the environment around them because they wanted to get a glimpse of what was out there, right? And apparently they saw a large, indistinguishable shadow that appeared to have 3 heads. And they and the 2 men on board the submarine thought that that creature could be the Leviathan or something close to it, and it was brushing up against their hull. They told that to the people above, and nobody believed them. So eventually, when the expedition concluded, I don't know if it ended right there or if they went a little bit more. Again, it's kind of hard to find information on this story. They came back up to the surface, and they saw that the outside of their submarine was almost completely destroyed. To the extent where they could still come up safely, but just barely so. If it had been a little bit more destroyed, something terrible could have happened. And not to mention that the metal surrounding the hull of the submarine was about 5 inches thick. So the fact that whatever this creature was that swam by their submarine, and let's just mention that, okay? It's not like it did a head-on collision with the submarine, because obviously they would have been able to tell. To me, it kind of seems like it swam by them just close enough to brush up against it, maybe move it a little bit, but not enough to like throw them around inside. And just by it doing that, just the force of its size alone tore apart the metal on the outside of the submarine. And the entire crew was scared, but the rest of the crew kind of chalked it up to like the pressure, the rocks, or something else. They didn't want to believe what these guys were saying. The 2 men on board who initiated this entire expedition were adamant that that was the Leviathan that they just ran into. The legendary sea monster that no man could kill. But a story like that is a prime example of like one of those tales that could have been fabricated, because despite the fact that it seems like it could be true, there's very little evidence to support it. As far as I could tell, there was no pictures taken, there's no videos taken, and none of the crew has been identified. Again, at least from the research that I put into this, I couldn't find it anywhere, at least the original source. And it kind of scares me, you know, because we've talked about this in previous episodes, just the fact that there could be these large, otherworldly creatures living under the ocean. And I think a majority of us expect there to be that there, especially considering that at some water pressure levels, there's the whole giganticism that occurs where creatures living in these environments tend to elongate for whatever reason and turn huge, despite the fact that there's less food down there for them to eat. Scientists still don't really know why that is, but I guess they're starting to pay attention because they started to put these hydrophones everywhere. Now, if you don't know what a hydrophone is, it's a microphone specifically designed to stay underwater and monitor the ocean's surface, right? The seafloor, the creatures, everything. Scientists use this to monitor like the wave activity, the creatures, you know, just to keep tabs on everything, right? And because of this, they might have caught what is still to this day the most terrifying sound to date. Of course, I'm referencing the infamous bleep. If you guys are familiar with this, I'm sure you might be because of those cringy YouTube videos with all the cartoons. The bleep is a sea creature that is believed to have been caught by one of these underwater microphones. And it stands out because the way that they distribute these microphones is they'll place them hundreds of miles apart from each other. And the thing that was so unique about this specific incident, this specific sound that they captured, was because it was at such a high pitch from what they were used to across several different microphones in the middle of the Southern Pacific Ocean. Now, I want you to remember that the Southern Pacific Ocean, okay? Because they tried to debunk this later on, saying that it was icebergs falling into the water, but I'll tell you why that doesn't add up. So, in 1997, scientists were monitoring all these underwater microphones, and out of nowhere, they caught this sound across several different microphones hundreds of miles apart from each other. When analyzing the sound, they couldn't pinpoint what it was. These things had been around for decades, and they had captured a sound that they had never heard previously and had never seen to this extent before. Something that was loud enough to activate several different microphones. And on top of that, be a sound that they had never heard before. Here's what they captured. Now, I know it's not the scariest of sounds. It kind of just sounds like a bubbling or whatever, right? But it's the fact that nobody really knows what it is. Now, there were some organizations that were researching into this, and they said that to make this sound, the creature would have had to been this dimension by this dimension, and it most likely looks like this, and that. And now, if you look it up, the thing that they're talking about is fucking terrifying. It would be the largest known creature to have ever existed, easily bigger than the megalodon, the giant shark that blew up recently on TikTok and shit. And so much so that it could eat the megalodon and all other giant water life creatures easily. On top of that, it could be like an apex predator that we have very little information on, because if it's as big as they're prophesizing or theorizing, then there'd be no other creature in the world that could compete with it, especially today, considering that the megalodons died off millions of years ago and this thing was caught just a few decades ago. Now, when asked, the director of the organization that placed these microphones under the water said, and I quote, "It's unusual when a sound is recorded on all of the sensors we have deployed. If it's a ship or a whale, when it makes a sound in the ocean, it isn't big enough to be recorded all the way across the Pacific. But this sound was recorded on so many hydrophones, so it stood out in our mind as being something unique." End quote. And again, that's from Dr. Robert Dziak, the manager of acoustics for the people that placed all of the microphones in the water. I believe that's how you say your name. Robert, if you ever hear this, I'm very sorry. But it was so large that even at the time, they didn't really know what it was, and it caught their interest because, like he said, whales and ships aren't big enough to make a sound that could spread that far. This thing, whatever it was, did. And to this day, we still haven't been able to identify it or hear the sound again. Meaning it probably lives in a part of the ocean that we can't easily access, and we just have to wait for it to reappear. Now, I mentioned before that they try to rationalize it as icebergs, and let me tell you what I mean. So, recently, I'm not entirely sure how recent, they try to debunk the entire existence of this creature by saying that the sound that they heard was actually the sound of icebergs melting into the ocean, and I believe it's when a chunk of the ice hits a certain part of the seafloor, causing the dump, which didn't really make any sense to me, and I looked it up a little bit more, but I couldn't find any clear answers on why they're blaming the icebergs. Because to me, when icebergs melt, it raises the sea level, right? And on top of that, icebergs don't drown. They don't sink to the bottom of the ocean. They float. That's the whole reason why they're known. They're big hunks of ice islands that float. So how is it that an iceberg melted and fell to the bottom of the ocean at such a depth that it's hard for our submarines to get there and make a sound that was loud enough for multiple different microphones to pick it up when even a ship couldn't do it? Or a whale. Like, you see what I mean? It doesn't really add up. And I'm sure if you were to look it up, they'll have some sort of professional jargon that explains it, but to me, it just doesn't make any sense. To me, it's like they realize that this could be something that the world isn't ready to handle, and so they have to cover it up. Because I don't know how I would react if they were to announce that these kind of creatures actually did exist. I might be fine with it, but I know a lot of other people would have to like question their faith, you know? Or what if that creature that we're starting to call Bleep, I believe it is actually the Leviathan, you know? I don't fucking know. It's scary. And for those of you smart Alex out there that are probably going like, well, maybe it could have been like a giant squid, because those are on record. We know that giant squid exists. Squids and other, I believe they're called arthropods, don't make any sounds. On top of that, they're one of the smartest creatures in the entire ocean. So much so that they actively avoid human contact because they've learned to avoid us. So it's not like one of these things, if it was even capable of making sounds, would choose to go up to a microphone or several different microphones and make this noise. There's just something completely unique about it that to this day we still can't really fully understand. Now, it's weird because a lot of people, when they initially discovered this case, assumed that it was the fictional Cthulhu creature, right? And yes, if you didn't know, Cthulhu is a made-up creature. It's not real. An author made it up in the 1920s. I'm pretty sure I've said this before, but just reminding all of you. The weird part about it is Cthulhu, in his origin story, was said to have a nest where he rested in the southern Pacific Ocean. And when you pinpoint it on a Google map, it's less than 1,500 meters, so 1,500 meters away from where they initially heard the sound of the bleep creature, or the bloop creature. Is it bloop? It might be fucking bloop, and I've been calling it bleep this whole time. Son of a bitch. Whatever. The bloop creature. It was less than 1,500 meters away from where the bloop creature was originally heard, which is pretty fucking wild. More than anything, it means that that place should be worth investigating. But it's like, there's so many weird things about the ocean itself. It's like, where do you even begin? You know? Take the Bermuda Triangle, for instance. I don't think it gets talked about enough nowadays compared to like when I was a kid, except for, again, those cringy YouTube videos with like the cartoon graphic thumbnails. Aside from those, it doesn't really have the same mystique surrounding it that it did when I was a kid. Because when I was a kid, the Bermuda Triangle was kind of like everywhere. We saw it in movies, we saw it in TV shows, people talked about it, people knew about it. At least that's what I remember, right? In one of my special classes in elementary school, I got to research the Bermuda Triangle. And even then, as like a little 8-year-old boy, it fascinated me because there is this specific section of ocean that you couldn't go into. And it's weird because the appeal for me is the fact that I don't know about it, right? So it almost makes me not want to look into it because it's the same for me as like a bottomless pit. The whole appeal about a bottomless pit is that it's bottomless and it never ends. But if we were to discover something that could be a bottomless pit and then went all the way to the bottom and figured out it wasn't bottomless, it kind of ruins the appeal for me, right? And I know people are actively trying to discredit the Bermuda Triangle, but to me, I think we should live and let be and leave it, right? Because there's too many incidences surrounding it to question whether or not it's real. Even if we can't find any concrete proof as to why it's happening, something is happening and we should just leave it at that, in my opinion. Because over the last, I want to say 200 years or more, actually, I think it's a little bit longer than that. Over the last 500-ish years, there have been at least a reported 80 missing vessels with hundreds, let me repeat, hundreds of missing people, right? All throughout history. Boats, ships, airplanes, people just go missing in that sea. Like in 1918, there was a Navy ship of 300 men on their way to Baltimore. They had to pass through the Bermuda Triangle, and they were on a high advanced ship for the time. You know, it's 1918. They didn't have a lot, but they had enough to work with. And they were capable of sending out an SOS signal if need be. They went through the Bermuda Triangle, never to be seen again. No SOS signal was ever received. When the Navy went to investigate the missing crew and to try to find all 300 people, they were left speechless because there was no wreckage anywhere, no bodies to be found. In all their searching, there was nothing that they could find of this crew. When asked about it, the Navy even said, quote, "The disappearance of this ship has been one of the most baffling mysteries in the annals of the Navy," end quote. This place is so fucked that even the Navy at the time couldn't figure out what was going on. Then you have the legendary Flight 19 disappearance, where there was 4 experienced pilots and their instructor who flew over the Bermuda Triangle and radioed in asking for directions, telling them that they were traveling east and they should be to where they were going to go by now, only for the radio tower to tell them, no, they're not traveling east, and they've been flying for an hour. Next thing you know, they lose contact and they're never heard from again, never seen again. And there's countless examples of this, over 80. Again, I mentioned this. It's like there's something about the ocean itself that is so mystifying to me. And it's so scary. Like, we don't know what's going on out there. Actually, recently, there was a crew that was inside the Bermuda Triangle that managed to take a video of some of the activity that's going on there, right? They didn't catch no large open sinkhole that leads you to the bottom of the ocean or anything like that, but they did get something very strange. In this video, which is very poorly taken, by the way, I should mention, you can see tidal waves starting with no external causes, reaching at least 90 feet high in the sky, right? So there's this crew. They're driving through the ocean, or I should say swimming through the ocean. They're on the ocean. They're navigating through the ocean. The water is turning crazy. It's getting kind of hard to control the ship. And the next thing you know, a giant tidal wave the size of a fucking mountain pops up out of nowhere and starts slamming down on the ship, kind of like God is sending tidal waves to them. And they managed to get a video of it. And this baffled scientists, because according to all of their research and all their documents, there was no reason for those tidal waves to be that aggressive at that time of day when that video was taken. It's like it's just happening on its own. Like there's a force around there that could be dooming anybody who comes in. And I know some people want to say it's like portals or it's like dimensions or whatever the fuck. But to me, it's like the bottomless pit. I don't really want to know why it's happening, personally. I would say, let's just not go there. The whole alluring mystique of it is that we don't know why. And what's it going to take for us to find out the why, you know? How many more people are going to have to go missing before we start to realize, like, maybe this is just a bad idea. Let's just not go here. Something about that area is fucked, so we should just stay away. But I know we're not going to. You know? Like when people started to become fascinated with the Kraken back in the day, there was a lot of people who would go out and try to hunt down the Kraken. And it's like, why? Why would you try to challenge a 100-foot squid monster that eats ships? I don't know. It's just strange to me. The entire ocean itself is freaky to me. And I know, I can hear you, okay? There's probably a lot of you wondering why I haven't mentioned Atlantis yet. And there's a very specific reason, because during my research, I had initially planned to include Atlantis on this list and talk about Atlantis, right? Because I'm covering the ocean. Atlantis is like the most famous ocean city. It's known as the sunken city, I believe. But in my research, I found out that Atlantis might not actually be in the ocean. So I decided to do like a separate episode on that later in the future. But to sum it up here, Atlantis was told to us initially by the philosopher Plato in ancient Greece. He heard it from his uncle, Solon. And Solon actually heard the tale while he was traveling Egypt. So while he was out exploring Egypt, you know, before he came back to Greece and told Plato about it, he heard the story of the lost city of Atlantis. And they were telling him about the structure, the layout, etc., 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 and how the entire city fell in one day and it was completely submerged in water. Now, that's an Egyptian tale that takes place in Egypt. When he originally heard this story, it would have been around 600 BC or like 11,600 years ago from today. So the geographical landscape at that time would have been much different to ours today. If you're familiar with Pangea and how, you know, the tectonic plates move and how the continents move, that kind of thing is applying to this story. So when the story was initially told, everybody immediately started looking in the wrong place because they heard ocean, they heard sunken city, and everybody looked towards their oceans. But when this story was originally taking place, you know, in 600 BC, where Atlantis would have been where there is no longer any oceans. because they all dried up and turned to deserts, more specifically the deserts of Egypt. So this advanced civilization that lived thousands and thousands of years ago would have actually been located where the desert is today, because back when it was originally built, there was a lot more water around, and that's why it was able to be sunk. So that's just a cool fact. Again, I'll probably talk about that in some other episode, because I believe there was actually some researchers that went and found the sunken city, but more on that later. For now, though, I think I'll just start concluding it here, because again, I can talk about the ocean and how scary it is for probably hours, and there's a lot that I didn't touch on, because again, I don't want to make a 4-hour episode, and I got a lot of notes that I'll probably come back to. But here's some quick facts before I end up the show, okay? So, pirates were actually kind of based. Pirates and sailors. I say pirates because of One Piece and everything. But pirates were actually kind of based because they had this superstition revolving around women. More specifically, they had 3 that really interest me. 1, if a regular woman were to come onto a ship, it was considered bad luck. Mainly because she would be distracting the crew from working, since most of them didn't see women on a daily basis. But 2, also because their presence just kind of like... Did I say 2? It doesn't matter. Also because their presence kind of just signaled bad luck. But if a pregnant woman were to somehow be on board and give birth to a child while out at sea, that was considered good luck. And sailors kind of wanted that in a sense. Alternatively, naked women were also seen as a sign of good luck, which is why the whole story of mermaids ended up being so prevalent among those times, because the thought of finding naked women out in the ocean was supposed to be a sign of good luck. But then it ended up being that mermaids, at least the legends of mermaids, were sinking sailors to the bottom of the ocean, which is why it was so confusing. That's why they were doing all this PSA about it at the time. Because sailors were like, oh, naked woman in the ocean, good luck. And then they were getting dragged to the bottom of the ocean. So I think that's pretty fascinating. And what they would do is they would take the figurehead of the ship and they would turn it into a naked woman. They would have naked women sculpted as the figurehead of the ship so that it would bring them good luck. And they had a lot of little things like this that they did to signal good luck. If you've seen any sort of ocean or pirate media, you're probably familiar with all this. Like Pirates of the Caribbean, when Jack is trying to enlist that woman onto his group and the henchman's telling him not to let him. That is actually historically accurate. So there you go. But again, I don't want to go too deep into this. This is more of like a light delve into these kind of topics. And oh my God, it's already 41 minutes. I'm so sorry, people. But whatever. It's not meant to be too scary or too informative. Just something to get you thinking, something to help you pass through your day. Eventually, though, in one of these future episodes, it is going to be really topic based, and I'm just kind of preparing you for that now because it's going to be a lot different format wise from the episodes that we've been putting out recently. It's going to be more of like a show where I have a script, etc., etc. So I'm just preparing you. Also, I'd like to take this time to just announce some of the future plans for the mission logs, at least my mission logs. With summer now being upon us, I decided that I was going to incorporate more scary things into my mission logs. So I know I just announced that I'm going to be doing like scary topic-based videos about like maybe vampires or possession or demons or something like that. But on top of that, I'm also going to try to do scary stories and scary experiences from people that I know. So that should be fun. If you guys are interested in that, stay tuned because that should be really cool. But it's not going to be all scary. I am going to have some lighthearted episodes in between so that you guys could have, just something else to chew on to. Because I know horror is not everybody's cup of tea. But for those of you that love it, you're really going to love it. On top of that, I'd like to take this moment to announce that I have just completed the book that I've been working on. I know I mentioned it in my last mission log and I mentioned it in some of my episodes, but recently I had taken about a week off to finish writing a novel that I had started. It was initially supposed to be a short story and it ended up turning into like a novella. It's about 130 pages long. It is available now and you can check it out on Amazon. I'll have it linked in the description of this episode if you guys are curious. I would love if you were to check it out, but that's up to you. I just thought I would give you guys first dibs because you're my fans and I love you guys and I appreciate you always being here. If you're curious as to what the story is about, a guy meets a girl online and starts to date her. Things go sour, and by the end of it, he's getting framed for murder. If you'd like to figure out how he got himself into that mess, I definitely recommend checking it out. Anyways, I feel like I'm starting to ramble at this point, and this is getting really long, so I'm just going to end it here. I'd like to thank all of you for tuning into this episode, and if you enjoyed this more scary content, don't be afraid to reach out. I love to hear from you guys. It always makes my day. But for now, I'm going to have to let you guys go. See you next week, and until then, stay safe. I love all you.
This concludes the transmission.